Hi everyone. Steve Yu has just sent me an email asking me if I'm interested in participating in the discussion you are having about the recent blog post that he wrote critiquing this graphic by Time magazine. And I actually was the first one to reply here saying that I believe that it is a shame that Time magazine is publishing these kinds of very simplistic infographics just because Time Magazine has a history of great infographics. So you can see my first comment over here, and Steve followed up with a question that I will address in a minute. But first of all, I would like to address some of the things that are being said in the discussion. So there are basically two sides in the discussion. One that stresses the importance of presenting information clearly. So basically, Steve got the original graphic and then he transformed the original graphic into a divided bar chart that displays the information in a much clearer way. But some readers are contending basically that the graphic that Steve designed is not as visually appealing as the original one. It will not be as successful in social media, for example. If you tweet these rather than tweeting these, this graphic down here will not be as effective as the original one. Well, there are several things that I need to say about this discussion. First of all, I agree with Steve that the original chart is not a good infographic by any means. I mean, it's not. The information is not well represented. It doesn't really let you compare anything to anything. It's representing the same amount, the same kind of information, the same kind of data, meaning parts of a whole, in 10 or 12 different ways, and that doesn't really make sense, because in a graphic like this you want to compare the percentages of House of Representative people, percentage of women in the House of Representatives, the percent of women in the Senate, the percentage of women who are governors, the percent of etc., the percentage of governors who are women, sorry, and the percentage of voters who are women. And you cannot really do that in this graphic, right? It's impossible, just because we are using bar charts in some cases, pie charts in other cases. So I do believe that Steve's solution, transforming all the data into a set of divided bar charts, is the right one. Okay, so let me begin saying that this is the right way of one of the possible ways of presenting the data effectively, in order to be able to see what percentage of each one of these things are women. Okay, what percentage of voters, what percentage of representatives, etc. Steve's chart is not perfect, though, I believe, and I will have a couple of things to say about the chart later on. I made my own redesign that I will show in a minute. But there are several things here that could be improved, and I'm aware that Steve would improve these things if he had more time to do the graphic. For example, I do believe that there are too many tick marks over here. The fact that we are placing these numbers, these figures here on the right, it seems that they belong to men. They are related to men rather than being related to women. I would put all these numbers over here. So there is certainly room for improvement. But in terms of a choice of graphic form to represent the data, structurally, this is the right way of showing the data. The original graphic is not a good one. That said, some people in the discussion down here are saying, or were saying, that again, the visual appeal of the graphic is also very important, and a bar graph will not bring as much attention to the data as something that includes pictorial elements like the original had. And I believe that argument has a point. I do believe that including small pictorial elements in charts or in infographics can really help. The problem is, and the challenge is, that when designers do this, in many cases, those pictorial elements interfere with the understanding of the information, which is basically the point that Steve was trying to make, in my opinion. I like to find middle grounds in all discussions that I participate in. So what I would propose is to keep Steve's idea of doing a divided bar graph, but then trying to add some pictorial elements to the chart in a way that makes the chart more visually appealing and also more eye-catching in social media. So here's what I would do. I actually did a quick redesign in Illustrator. So this is the original infographic. As I said, I don't really like it. Okay, it's not very effective. This is Adobe Illustrator, by the way, the tool that I use constantly to do print graphics, static graphics. This is Steve's redesign, and this is what I would propose. And I'm aware that this is not completely finished. All right, I'm not really fond of very using accent colors for everything. The graphic looks a little bit too aggressive, in my opinion, with that red used as the background color. But I believe that a graphic like this is the middle ground in between what Steve is saying and what some readers are pointing out about making the graphic a little bit more visually appealing to share in social media. So this graphic shows exactly the same information as the original one. It does it in a much more effective way, which is what Steve is claiming, and he is right. All right, because I believe that if you're going to use the language of infographics and the language of data visualization, you better do it right. And we know that a divided bar graph is better in this case. So let's use that. But then let's try to add a couple of pictorial elements that don't really interfere with the information. So a silhouette of a woman over here and a silhouette of a man over here. I believe that this could be one way of showing the data. I will be uploading this graphic to my website for further discussion. And then the other question here in the discussion was a question by Steve. He was asking down here, let me see, he said, it's after I replied that it's a shame that Time is doing these things. He's saying, it's interesting how news graphics have managed to skip the strict editorial standards that have traditionally been applied to news stories. Have news organizations typically lacked the expertise that's required to edit graphics? Well, that's indeed the case. And then, do they typically pay little attention to graphics? Has the demand for infographics grown during a time, etc.? What's my take? Well, there are many points that I would like to make about this question. The first one is that traditionally, infographics and data visualizations in news organizations were done by graphic designers. And nothing against graphic designers. There are wonderful graphic designers out there. But traditionally, all right, graphic designers were not trained in the principles of data visualization. And I'm talking about myself. I mean, 10 years ago, for example, 10, 12 years ago, I knew very little about, William Cleveland and, Robert McGill and, Edward Tufte and Stephen Few and all the other people, or Naomi Robbins, all the people who have been writing about data visualization and principles of data, or Colin Ware, right? So how to apply cognitive and perceptual principles to the design of data visualization. I knew very little about that just because I was trained as a journalist and as a graphic designer. Therefore, I emphasized in my older graphics, I used to emphasize the visual appeal of the graphic over the clarity of the graphic, or even the quality of the data in some cases. And that is completely wrong, in my opinion. I agree with Steve that if you want to create a journalistic graphic, what really matters is, first of all, showing the right data and doing it in a clear way. And after you do that, then you can think about embellishing the graphic a little bit, okay? If that doesn't interfere with the understanding of the information, which is what the original graphic in this case did wrong, in my opinion. And in terms of editing the stories, which is the other question, the editing graphics, which is what Steve is asking about here, that is also the case. I mean, journalistic editors, newspapers, magazine editors, etc., didn't learn to do graphics in journalism school. I learned nothing about, or very little about infographics in journalism school. And therefore, I was not prepared to do infographics when I began my career. I learned on the job and by reading and studying a little bit later on, right? And this is the case with many designers. The situation has changed. Okay, if you go to the places that do the best news data visualization out there, such as the New York Times or ProPublica or 538 and places like that, the people who work there already know principles of data visualization. So very rarely you will see infographics like the one that Steve was discussing. My guess is that the infographic published by Time was not done by the infographics desk at Time magazine. It was done by an advertising designer or something like that. This is just my guess, okay? I may be wrong with that. But this is the kind of infographic that a person who knows very little about principles of data presentation would create. And it's, by the way, the kind of infographic that I would do myself, that I would have done myself 15 years ago, just because I knew very little about how to present information. I was not trained to do that in school. Right now, as I said before, the situation has changed, and journalism schools like the University of Miami, for example, where I work, New York University, Columbia University, etc., the journalism Stanford University, the schools of communication and journalism in those places are training journalists and graphic designers in the principles of data presentation. So I believe, at least that's what I try to do with my own students. So I believe that the situation will improve even further in years to come. Anyway, I hope that all this discussion has been informative. As I said before, I will be posting my proposal for redesign in my own website, thefunctionalart.com. Take care.